Hey, everybody, and welcome to Dog Talk. Oh, thank you. As always, I'm your host, Michael J. Solar, and tonight we're going to have a special guest. Her name is Robin Bennett of the Dog Gurus. I'm really looking forward to tonight's episode and speaking with Robin. Just to let everybody know, throughout the entire show, you will be able to type in anywhere on your screen in the comments section. It'll pop up. We'll be able to answer any questions you have. So if you're watching live on our Facebook page or YouTube, please feel free to throw a comment in there so we can see that. And then this way, Robin and I can answer any of your questions. But Robin of the Dog Gurus is not only a business consultant, a dog trainer, and so much more, but tonight we're going to be discussing and finding out things that you should be getting your dog ready as you go back to work, as the pandemic is coming to an end and or going on vacation. So without any further ado, let me take this second to introduce Robin Bennett of the Dog Gurus. Hey!
How's it going?
Great. So,
Great
Robin, it's so awesome having you here. We have some people watching, and the topic we're going to be discussing tonight is getting your dog ready for you to go away, right? Now, let's think about that one for a second. We have been home, locked in our doors, locked in our houses, for the past year. So getting into this, what are some of the things that people need to start getting their dogs used to moving out of the pandemic now, going on vacation, I'm assuming, getting ready to go back to work? What some of the steps do you think that dog owners need to be considering?
Yeah, so we have been in a weird environment where we've been home for pretty much 24/7 with our dogs. A lot of people got brand new puppies. We have that pandemic puppy phrase now that people got their dog during the pandemic. Some of those dogs have literally never been home alone because of the pandemic. So first off, looking at, does your dog follow you everywhere? Are they kind of glued to you? And the very first thing I would start doing is trying to help them become accustomed to you, maybe being in another room without them, and hopefully building up to you actually leaving the house for a little bit at a time and building up to where you might have to actually go back to work. So really looking at, how is your dog's behavior at home right now? If you find that they're following you into the bathroom, following you into every room and clinging to you all the time, that's a little bit of a sign to say, what's that dog going to think when you actually go back to work or go out of town on vacation? So really taking an assessment of that. And for dogs that you may have had prior to COVID starting, then those dogs might need a little refresher about how to be alone again. So that's the first thing I would really look at, is how does your dog act when you're home with them now?
Yeah. So you said that if, for example, you got the puppy during COVID, right? So you got the puppy during COVID. It's a dog that's following you around all day, every day. You said leave them in another room and see how they do, right? That's one of the tips that you had brought up. What is your thoughts? Like, should the dog be crated, left with a toy? Do you think they need to have something to occupy them? Or do you think this is something that you should almost like a hide and seek game? And I'll let you answer that first. And then there's a compounding question. I'm going to ask you. Yeah, let me go with that one first. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great tips. I think a little bit of everything. If your dog was trained to be in a crate, I would definitely go back to reminding them what it feels like to be there. And I would leave them with I'm a big advocate of puzzle toys or safe toys that the dog can chew on that require their brain, like a stuffed Kong or something like that to work on. So leaving the dog in the crate, if they're used to the crate already, with that toy while you go out of the room for 10, 15 minutes and kind of see how they act. If their dog's not used to the crate, then that's something you can start working on to teach them to be in a crate so that they are safer if you do have to leave them. And that's a whole process to get a dog comfortable in the crate, starting with just keeping the door open and throwing treats in there and getting them used to being in that cozy area. The other thing that I like to do for dogs that maybe aren't ready for the crate yet, but you still want to practice leaving them in another room, is take a stuffed toy. So you get a toy that you can fill with some kind of treat that the dog likes and tie it to something that's not movable. So the choice for the dog is, I can chew on this thing and get peanut butter or steak or cheese or whatever, but I can't pick it up.
Hold on.
I can't pick it up and follow.
You said a stuffed toy. Hold on, we got to take a time out here. So we're gonna I gotta pull you back here.
Not a stuffed toy like a plush toy. That's what you're thinking.
Okay, all right. So the way they come up. So you're not thinking of a teddy bear that you're gonna suddenly whip around with some peanut butter. Okay, because I was just thinking in my head, going, that's gonna be a mess and a lot of money for people to be investing into. What you mean by a stuffed toy is a brand of product that you can put items into, just for clarity, everybody.
Yeah, toy. That's awesome. Yeah, a stuffed a toy that you can stuff with
stuff items into. Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder how many times I've ever said that, and people are like, "I got a teddy bear over here," and
I was just thinking in my head, I could see somebody now literally taking one of like their kids' dolls or something like that, putting peanut butter all over the thing, and literally like tying it up like it's hostage on the end table of something. I can just see that being I can see it popping up all over my Facebook after tonight's episode. Everyone's like, so Princess Leia's now tied up, and I could see that happening. Yeah. So what you mean is a stuffed toy, so time consumers. Right. I know for me, one of the big things that I recommend a lot is, I love doing Easter egg hunts with the dogs. I buy a ton of those plastic Easter eggs, and I hide them all around to do a little bit of scent work. That's how I like to desensitize the dogs to being away from me, because it gives them a longer period of time, because they actually are. It's my man-made puzzle game, right?
Right.
It gives them that longer period of time to keep themselves occupied, for me to get used to them being used to me being away.
I think that's an awesome idea, and I've also done that just with with the kibble that maybe you feed the dog. Is just take a handful of that dog's meal and just put it around in a particular room where now they're searching that room for the toy. I've done that, getting dogs used to being outside alone as well. So that's an awesome idea as well.
Yeah. So now, again, so getting back into we have this idea, we're getting him used to it. Is there a certain timeline that you feel like should it be built up? Like I'm a big component of up by twos, down by thirds, right? So like I like to do things in smaller sections. So if I'm getting a dog used to something, I like to do 30 seconds at a time. It does really well for 30 seconds. I go to a minute goes to 2 minutes, 2 minutes go to 4 minutes, right? That's the gist. In your opinion, getting used to this again, should they start that low of a number, or do you think they should test for failure first in that?
I would start, it kind of depends on the dog. If you really do think your dog is super needy, erring on the side of too short of a time is probably always better. But if your dog goes for 30 seconds and they don't even know you've gone, then I think you could probably jump up a little bit bigger increments. The other thing is, I do like to go incrementally, and I also like to do kind of a ping pong. So I might be up to 5 minutes, and then the next time I might go back down to a minute and then jump up to 10 minutes after that. So I kind of will ping pong back and forth. But again, it depends on how your dog is responding. If they're, settling down and you've left and they don't follow you around at all, you could probably go up in bigger increments. The other thing is, if your dog's starting to be okay with you being gone for 20, 30 minutes, then the next step would be, what does he do if you actually pick up your keys and go out in the garage and start the car and drive down, or go for a walk or whatever. So, inside you're in another room, and then how is he doing if you're outside? And those might be two separate things. You might have a dog that's like, I'm fine for hours on end if you're just in the other room. Yeah. 2 minutes of you leaving and I'm freaking out. So you have to test both of those.
I definitely see it. I mean, so you said the ping pong, like you like the ping pong. For me, like I said, I do up by twos, down by thirds. That's and I'm seeing it more as is it a preference point in your opinion, or have you seen anything different, like the way the dogs learn better by switching it up that random?
I think I actually am more systematic than just ping pong randomly. So I would go with what you're saying. I do think that it's a little bit more, if you systematize it a little bit more, you have better success. I wouldn't be totally random, because if you jump from like 5 minutes to 35 minutes and the dog doesn't do well.
Yeah, you have no idea where the
Really
fail
don't
is.
have
Yeah.
you really don't have an idea unless you have like a camera set up or something to say like, oh, at 10 minutes he started whining or whatever.
Right. But
But
then you also
like
have the fail point, right? Where now the dog's failed and has been learned to fail for that time. Yeah,
right,
I have a famous phrase here at Blue Line. We call it you must be consistently inconsistent to create consistency.
like I love it.
So,
That is perfect though. That is so
yeah.
true.
So it's definitely one of those things where I'm hearing you say, and I'm like, man, she's got to learn my line. You got to be consistently inconsistent
I
to
love it.
create consistency. And again, it's remember, and you probably agree with this, is that the most important thing is not to let the dog fail too long because we're trying to teach them for success, right? So you don't want that's why I guess going to 35 minutes after 5 minutes is really a bad thing because coming from the training background, as we both share, we know that we don't want the dogs to fail and stress out because then it's going to set up the next time even worse, right? So we always want to end on that good high note.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, and this is a big one. Now you yourself are more of a reward trainer, is that right?
Right.
So there's a big question I have to come into that one, which is, and I found this a lot of times when people are working with the reward systems, is that they're rewarding at the wrong times. Like, so for example, the dog has a fail point, but the dog still had a success point, which is mom came back, right? So they want the dog and mom to be related to as a positive, and utilizing that thought process in this scenario, right? So we're getting the dog used to you leaving, right? So the reward should actually technically be left in the room when mom leaves.
Right.
Is that okay? So that's a correct thing. All right. So we're
and I would
clarifying.
say this is the problem with doing that, going too big of a jump to where the dog does fail because you coming back now just rewarded the failure. So
Right.
my reward when I come back, if I'm working with a dog that I'm trying to build their confidence on, you're okay when I leave, I don't reward them when I come back. So when I come
Gotcha.
back, that's one of the big things. Leaving and coming back should be pretty neutral, not like this big, oh, like I missed you, you've been gone.
Yeah.
Or just like when you leave, you should avoid doing the whole, like, it's okay, be good, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Like
Yeah.
for a dog that is nervous, that is just not helping them at all. You just really want to make the coming and going routine neutral. So even if the dog succeeded in staying there for 5 minutes without being upset, I would still come back pretty neutral. And the reward would be maybe a few minutes after I've been there, then we start playing or whatever. But I just want to neutralize the coming and going periods, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah. I mean, it makes complete sense. And that's why I wanted you to clarify, because obviously there's a lot of information out there as dog owners. You can get on YouTube, Facebook, podcasts. Obviously here we are talking about information, and there's so much information that's going to come out. And that's really where it comes down to is we want some clarity, right? So sometimes I'm a dog trainer, you're a dog trainer. And there's a lot of times we talk in vagueness because dogs are different, just like people, right? So we need a lot more people to understand that with the pandemic and us being home, as you said, the pandemic, puppies, everybody's being there, we probably come across a bunch of stuff where we're not really anticipating how many things trigger dogs' stress levels. For example, car keys. Car keys to me is one of the number one triggers that trigger dogs' anxieties. And people don't realize that you can literally train your dog to get used to car keys by every time you walk around the house, right? Like you're going to go to the kitchen, go grab your car keys, then go grab your snack, and then put your car keys back and go sit on the living room table. It seems weird, or a process that most people are not taking into consideration, right?
Right.
And we only grab our car keys when we leave. So you're literally trained your dog without knowing you trained your dog that's a trigger.
Yep, exactly.
And we want to desensitize that. We don't want to reward that. Right. So that's where a time where I would probably, and again, I'm not 100% like I am a reward trainer, but I will tell you, I use everything. I'm an open book. I'm listening to everything. So I guess for me, I like some clarifying in other opinions. When I talk to somebody that's 100% dedicated to it, is for me, the reward is me in that scenario, right? I didn't leave. I didn't cause any stress. I want you to be desensitized to these things. Treats aren't necessarily utilized for that, right? In your opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, I would do exactly what you just said. And okay. I would even expand it to figuring out for women, a lot of times it's picking up their purse or putting on, like for a guy, it might be they have a certain briefcase or backpack. So sometimes it's just the type of shoes. Like my dog work from home anyway, but my dog knows when I put on my sneakers, that means we're going for a walk. So, which he's always going with me. So in that case, I don't care. But
yeah,
I would say that there's a lot of those cues, the key being one of them, but figure out what is that trigger for your dog. But yeah, in that situation, I would do exactly what you said. I would pick up the key, go about my business, get some coffee, put the keys down, go back and sit down. Obviously, I'm just not leaving, so that the keys don't necessarily always predict
right.
I'm to walk out the door and leave for any length of time.
Now, I believe, so with me personally, I do it with everything. I do it with my shoes. I even do it with the dog's leash. I will literally walk around my house with the dog's leashes and stuff like that. That way, the dogs don't even look at that as a trigger that's any notion to them. Cars starting, finishing. But one of the big things that I have to say is that, I am a huge advocate for rewards, right? And I do believe rewards need to be utilized during these times, right? Like, so leaving out the front door, coming back in, do you give the dog a treat?
I will give the dog the treat before I leave, so that the treat, and typically I'll use something like a Kong toy with food or a snuffle mat that has treats in it that are typically higher value than what I might give normally. So the reward is actually, I've gone, but there's this thing here that they really like. And when I come back, I typically won't use any food. The fact that I'm back is enough reward.
Right. You are the reward at that moment in time.
Right. So I don't
you would do to bring value. Would you bring anything more of a higher value? Like, so just, I'm going to throw this out one at you. This is more of a curiosity for myself. So I reward my dog. So here's the scenario, right? I'm leaving. We've trained our dog to, I leave, you're going to get the stuffed filled toy, right?
Right.
So you have that. Now suddenly, do you ever use that toy when you're home as well? So the dog doesn't just relate that to, I'm a leaving toy?
Absolutely.
Or do you, okay, you do that. So
and I would always get that dog used to it before I've ever given it to him just for leaving. Because
right, but I'm just saying that do you want to make sure that you're using it outside of the I'm leaving afterwards, right? Like
I do.
Yeah. Okay. So then how many times do you find that, do you do it once a day after, like what would be a good process for the homeowners in that scenario, to making sure that, I guess, the dog's not triggered by that toy, meaning leaving?
I would use it. Well, first of all, I would use it and make sure the dog understands how it works. Because not every dog knows what they're supposed to be doing with it, depending on what toy you're giving them. So I would say at least a week or so of just, giving it to them while you're around and can see it, make sure that they understand how the whole thing works. And then I would probably do it if the dog's used to it, and then now you're going to use it when they leave. I would probably still use it at least, let's say you use it 5 days a week when you leave. I would probably still use it at least half that time when you're home as well. So if you're going to use it 5 days a week, I would say at least 2 to 3 times during the week you're using it too while you're home, because that is a good point. You don't want the association to be, this is the toy. Otherwise it just becomes like the keys.
Yeah. It triggers the dog's anxiety.
Now
right?
A new trigger for me because they're going to, leave now. So but
the
reward is actually positive enough that doesn't happen, but I would still use it other times.
Right. And you're saying if you use it pretty much around like 50% neutral. So I like to call that neutral because it's not really, if you're using the toy when you're home, I believe it becomes more of a neutral position, not a positive negative. It seems neutral, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
When you're leaving, right, you're the negative, it's the positive. So to remain anxiety and neutral, that's the easiest way to understand it. Would you, I guess, agree with that statement?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And then when I come home, the reward of me coming home is enough reward. I wouldn't, if you have a dog that doesn't care whether or not you leave, do whatever you want when you come home. But if you have a dog that's worried and gets nervous when you leave, when you come home, the reward is that you just walked in the door.
Yeah.
Your dog,
and that's a lot.
Excited just because of that. I don't really think you have to give treats. I don't think you even need to do a lot of praise, and doing too much of that will actually cause more anxiety long-term. So obviously I come in, I'll say hi to my dog, and then let them outside or, take them on a little walk or whatever. That's going to be enough. I don't think you have to specifically say, here's a treat or do anything, because you've just shown up and you are the reward.
Yeah, that's how I have to 100% agree with that one. I mean, our dogs are creatures of attention and affection, and they thrive for us, right? Like, I always say, when you come home, your dog wants to know all about your day. So
Exactly.
they can't wait. The reward is listening to you and getting you to talk to them. And they're like, oh my God, how was your day? You left. And, I know all you did was go to the mailbox, but tell me about that walk. Was it
Yeah,
great? Did you smell
exactly.
things? Was the grass out there? Yeah, they love it. Right. So it's one of those neat things. Now, so twist of a little bit same subject, but a little bit slightly different here. The Dog Gurus is a business consulting company, and you are a major impact in the daycare boarding, and training in the entire pet industry here in the United States. Is right?
Right.
And
And
you
actually,
guys are
we have
also,
people all over the world, but yeah,
yeah,
mostly in the
and then
United States.
you guys are also, didn't you and your business partner also be a part of the origination of PAC?
Well, Susan, the other co-founder, Susan, was
Uh-huh.
actually one of the co-founders of PAC as
That's
well.
all, yeah, and that's where in our last episode we had interviewed about PAC and learned about it. So now bringing that up, and talking about your credibility here and what you guys have been doing, the pandemic, right? Like, so before the pandemic, doggy daycares, boarding, were very systematic. I mean, there was a lot of them popping up. There was a lot of dogs going to doggy daycare, people going on vacation and boarding their dogs at different facilities. And then obviously, we were all locked in. So those, obviously those businesses weren't really, getting your dog. You weren't bringing your dog there. It's irrelevant if they were good or bad or successful or not, but people weren't bringing their dogs there. Right. So
Right.
now the pandemic is over. We are moving forward, right? We're coming out of our houses. We're doing these things. And you were talking about giving the people the tips on getting the dog used to them leaving. But here's a big one for you. What about bringing the dogs to a facility for like let's go with one place at a time. So let's go with doggy daycare, right? So what are some of the things that people should be looking for now that the pandemic is over? The doggy daycares there's new ones opening up every day, it seems like. Dog sitters, pet walkers, right? So let's do it this way. Dog walkers and sitters, right? Let's go with the smaller companies for
Okay.
the ones with the property, right? So a dog walker and or sitter. What are some of the things that people should be interviewing and prepping themselves for and their dog for with getting a pet sitter and or walker?
So one of the biggest things I would be looking for is what's the education of that person that's going to come and take care of your dog. And I would really be looking at people that have certifications. So for pet sitters, there are pet sitting certifications that you can get. And that just shows the person who's hiring them that they've got some education. They should have first aid education. They should have education in terms of canine body language. They should understand how it's safe to harness your dog or leash your dog or whatever tools you use. You want someone that understands how to use them. You don't want them to be experimenting with your dog basically because they've never had the opportunity to learn whatever things that you want them to reinforce with your dog. So that's probably the biggest thing, is asking, what their protocols are for what does a typical walk look like or visit look like. I also am a huge advocate of hiring people who are going to do some enrichment with your dog. So
Okay.
not just necessarily take them on a walk, but maybe they'll do some tricks, or maybe they'll reinforce some commands that you've taught, or maybe they'll bring a climb over and do some platform training with your dog, whatever. Like, because you don't want it to be just a routine, boring activity day after day after day for your dog. So asking them, what they can do to add value to that visit, I think is really important too. But education is probably the number one thing I would be asking a pet sitter or dog walker. What education do they have?
Now that brings up a great point. So there's a couple of things that I want to, I'm going to play devil's advocate on you.
Okay.
So certifications, right? Let's go with that one. So with certifications, it's a big thing, but here's the downside to a lot of civilians, right? Or pet owners, right? So they're not really civilians.
As a former Marine, I can appreciate. I say that.
Okay, good guys. You get it. All right.
What are you talking about?
Yes, you get the phrasing. All right. So
Exactly.
yeah, you got the hint above my head then. Okay,
Yeah,
good to go.
exactly.
So sorry, it threw me off. All right. If they don't know what the certifications are, and that's something that I'm big with, because a lot of times, being in the industry as long as we have, right? And we have tons of certs, we have tons of backings. But when we tell people that they should ask they're professional, that they certified and things like that. There's so many organizations that are giving out certifications, right? What really should they be asking for besides the certification? Like, do you feel that they should be asking something specific outside of certification, like something that might be in it? Like, I thought you had a really good point about the pet CPR, but is there anything more outside of it?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because there's the way I look at certification is there's certification and there's education. And you can have both or you can have neither.
Yeah.
And often what certification means to me is that there is some proof of the education, but you can have the education without certification, if that makes sense.
Right. Yep.
I actually, when I look at like a school that might say when you graduate from this school, you get a certification, that means they're providing the education, but they're also saying what education is required to get the certification. And then there's what PAC is a third party organization. CCPDT for dog trainers is similar. They don't actually teach the material. They just say, this is what you should know. And you get the education wherever you want. And then if you pass our exam, it's a third party independent certification. So, but what I'm specifically looking for is health and safety. So at first aid, what are do you have education in what are the most common health problems that you'll see, whether it's a dog sitter, dog walker, in lodging and daycare, there's certainly areas where the most common injuries or illnesses are going to happen, things that the staff should be trained on identifying bloat or understanding what vomiting might be caused by, that kind of thing. So they know at least when they take them to the vet. I don't necessarily think they're going to have to, fix the dog, but they should know when it's something serious enough to take to a vet. The other thing is I want to know, how do they recognize canine body language? So I really am interested in knowing, do they understand what a dog looks like when they're nervous, unhappy, fearful, because how you respond to that dog is going to depend on that. And then I do like to know a little bit about if they have, I don't necessarily say they have to be a trainer, but I do want to know if they know a little bit about some of the tools that I might use for my own dog. And especially if I want them to reinforce that, or, what are they going to do if my dog is pulling on leash, if you care about that. Maybe an owner doesn't care about that. But if you do want them to reinforce things that your dog might already know, how are they taught, or how did they learn to do that? And does that make sense? Or are they just going to, be pulled down the street by your dog?
Right. Exactly. And that could backfire on them too, right? If your dog's learning to pull with the dog walker, it's sort of a problem, right?
Exactly.
So those are big things. Now, same thing with pet sitters. Like, so one of the things that I typically tell people about with pet sitters is to look for the insurance. Are they bonded? Because obviously you're bringing them into your home, right? So that's something that's very important. Do they have background checks? It's definitely a unique scenario because those two, you're bringing people into your home. Dogs can be a little bit more protective. So I guess going back into the fact that the dog hasn't really met a whole lot of people, getting the dogs used to those people coming over now as guests, maybe having a special knock on the door. I tell people that they should go to their homes and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I actually tell people that what they should do is when they come home, they should pretend that they're a guest, like ring their doorbell, knock on the door. So the dog actually gets used to that what a stranger would do, and the dogs become desensitized to it again. And they're a little bit more welcoming and they're not as protective.
Right.
So they get used to the dog walkers and sitters.
Yeah. The bonding is definitely an issue. Background checks for pet sitters as well as daycare lodging facilities, I would be asking if they do background checks on their employees as well for the same reasons. But I do think whether you're going to use a pet sitter, dog walker, or you're going to take your dog someplace, doing a couple of trial days is super important. So I would make sure that pet sitter comes over and meets the dog. I also like to have them come over and get into the house with me, maybe outside or just down the street. So, because to your point, there are some dogs that are perfectly lovely when the owner's standing there with the friendly stranger, but that friendly stranger becomes a not so friendly stranger when the owner's not there. And you want to figure that out prior to you being in the Bahamas. And this is happening now. The person can't get your dog out of, a room or whatever. So, I think anytime you can desensitize the dog to, rattling of the door, ringing the doorbell or whatever, I think is important.
Yeah, I truly believe in that wholeheartedly. I always tell people, I'm like, listen, to get your dog used to guests, the first thing you do is, especially if you have somebody else living in a home with you, is one of you comes home like normal and the other person pretends to be a stranger.
Right.
It gets used to it. Or you order a lot of pizza and
Oh,
take
I
off,
was just
right?
about to say that we do puppy parties where we tell people, and especially now that, COVID's ending and we can do this,
Yeah.
but you just tell people, hey, everybody come over, spread out the time you're going to arrive and we'll have pizza when you get here.
Yeah.
So,
It sucks to be
yeah,
the last person, right?
and that's why I actually love puppies that are, in the homes around the Halloween time, because
Yeah.
Halloween to me is like the greatest training opportunity ever,
Yeah,
because
I can
you've
see
got
that.
just a steady stream of crazy, little children who look like, goblins. So it's even,
Yeah.
it's not even just
But,
the doorbell. It's also
but you
like,
gotta also
what,
be mindful. There's also causing some stress too, right? All the goblins
uh,
and the
yeah, yeah,
odors.
yeah. I
Yeah.
keep away from the door, and I'm just teaching the dog,
Yeah.
like, doorbell rings, you go over there. Doorbell rings, you go over there. But you have like so many
Yeah.
opportunities to do
I
it.
love doing platform training during it, because even
Yeah,
if the dog is going to let out some anxiety with barking and stuff, they're still respecting the rules of staying on the platform. And
absolutely.
that's what's important, is to let the dogs be able to address their anxiety, right? And then, but also
Absolutely.
show them that they can still be obedient to you as well, so they don't have to defy you with their training. All right,
Right.
next one is daycare, right? So getting dogs used to the next step of dropping them off at doggy daycare.
So daycare and lodging, same questions in terms of their education of their staff. How do they train them? The bonding isn't as much of an issue, although the facility should have insurance, but you're not obviously going to
Yeah,
their house. The background check's still super important. And then I would also be looking at what do they do with the dogs in daycare? And meaning there are a lot of daycares. Actually, when Susan and I started, the common daycare was sort of all day play. To drop your dog off, they're in a big group all day, they pick them up. We actually are now, for the past 5 years or so, we've been recommending more of an enrichment based model. So
mhm,
smaller groups tend to be better. Groups of 6 to 8 tend to be better for dogs, and
yeah,
more rest periods tend to be better. And then rotating activities. So they might not spend all their day just playing. So really asking what activities are going to, will my dog be involved with? And hopefully there's 4 to 5 different things that your dog can do during the day. It's not just sort of all day play with other dogs, which I really feel can overexhaust a lot of dogs.
yeah,
And then really looking at how they're evaluating the dogs. So any daycare really should have some kind of an evaluation process to make sure that they're bringing in the right dogs. And although I make a living helping daycares operate a safe facility, I will tell you that I personally think 40% of dogs are probably the dogs that are like, I really want to play with other dogs. I actually think the majority of dogs are like, I would rather not. I'd
yeah,
rather not
yeah, I
play
agree.
with a whole group of 20 dogs.
Yeah,
They might as a puppy, but we often see dogs that age out, which is why the smaller groups are usually better, because
yeah.
they're a little bit easier to manage and dogs are a little bit more comfortable. So I would be asking all those things. And then I would definitely be going for a trial day or two to make
Yeah.
sure that your dog is really enjoying it.
Yeah, I like that. It's a neat thing. I'm a big advocate, coming from the training background, now owning facilities and being involved with the now we have we call it the Canine Country Club. So I don't use the phrase doggy daycare. We call it the
Right.
Canine Country Club, and the reason why is because it is a country club. Your dog will come, your dog will swim, your dog will exercise, and your
Right.
dog will go in a small group of 3 to 5 in a max. We don't go in any type of bigger numbers.
Right.
We also try to match the breeds for play, right? Like, so bully breed dogs that like to wrestle, we're not going to put it with dogs that like to chase, right? Like,
Right.
so, because that's going to cause a bigger issue. But I'm huge with that kind of stuff and looking at those kinds of things and looking for the facilities. But when you think about like dogs getting used to the drop offs and stuff like that, is there any things that you suggest that owners have to start getting used to? In particular, what I mean by that would be is the drive, right? So dogs have probably not been out driving during the pandemic. So that's probably something that they're going to have to go through and deal with is that right there. I mean, just getting the dogs ready for the car ride to the facility. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm an advocate of securing your dog in your car. So whether you're going to use a harness or you're going to use a crate or seatbelt or whatever, I would get them used to that. If you're going to have them in a crate, I would make sure they're used to the crate before you plop them in a crate in the car and start driving. I
Yeah.
do a lot of work just in the driveway. Let's see, will the dog get in the driveway? Can I hook its harness on or its leash or whatever you're going to secure your dog with? Is that okay for your dog? And then if we start the car, is that okay? And obviously build up incrementally to whatever distance you have to drive. For some dogs, they're going to be like, great, we're in a car ride. This is awesome. And
Yeah. Yeah. Lower the window. Let's go. Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then you'll find other dogs that are just more nervous about the whole situation. And I do find kind of experimenting with those dogs, sometimes the location of where they are in the car, if they're on a seat or on the floor or in the back versus in the front, like sometimes that makes a difference. So sometimes whether they see out the window or can't see out the window can make a difference. So just figuring out what is the best way that's going to be safe for you and the dog, and start working towards that. I do find most dogs that love going to daycare or boarding, after a few trips, they get so excited when they, turn that last corner and they know, oh, we're going to daycare. So that could actually help if you're taking your dog someplace where it's fun. Unfortunately, a lot of times the only place we take our dogs is to a place that might not be as fun for the dog, like the veterinarian or groomer or that kind of thing. So making sure that you're taking your dog on those rides that ends up with a walk or a hike or swimming somewhere or whatever your dog likes.
Now, we did an interview with a young lady, Jess Ocon, Blue Nine Pet Products.
Yeah,
I know. Well, she's the one who hooked me up with you guys, right?
She's great people.
Phenomenal. And she had brought up a lot of things about, getting the dogs used to grooming as a former groomer. I'm assuming she's still grooming, but obviously she works for Blue Nine currently. But she had brought up a lot of things like getting the dogs, resting their hand, their chin on their hand and things like that, getting them used to being on the platforms. Now that you've been, now the pandemic's over and grooming, I guess I'm going to be honest, I don't really recall. Was it completely shut down? Was it?
It's shut down for most places temporarily, and then a lot of groomers in different states fought to be essential businesses.
Okay.
So some of them did reopen, and then those that didn't, they had a big wait list when they finally did open. So grooming is a huge demand right now.
Gotcha. So now here, I guess the question would be are you finding that grooming and groomers are dealing with more aggression with this because of the fact that the people weren't used to it at younger ages?
Well, I'm not specifically sure for groomers. I know for daycare and lodging, we're seeing a lot of dogs that are completely ill-equipped to be with other dogs. And I feel like I see that as a trainer too. I feel like I won't say aggression, but I definitely see more reactive dogs.
Yes.
And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I also think that owners that take their dog to dog parks and daycares, and that's the main exercise for the dog, you can actually build a sense of hyperness in the dog, and which I don't think is healthy. So if you don't balance some of that with some training and some impulse control exercises and that kind of thing, you can just create like this dog that flips out every time he sees other dogs, which is definitely not what we want. So, but I do think we're seeing a lot of dogs that, even dogs that, from what we're seeing from our daycare facilities, even dogs that used to come to daycare regularly pre-COVID are having kind of an acclimation period when they're coming back now, because they've just been away from it for so long.
Yeah, it's definitely unique. It's an amazing time period that we're in, right? Like we went from very steady growing industry, right? Then it went to zero.
Right,
pretty much
overnight.
Yeah, pretty much bottomed out overnight. And now a lot of our businesses, and being a consultant yourself, you probably know way better than me, obviously, is that, we're seeing that the companies really had to adjust a lot for the COVID restrictions, for dealing with COVID and everything like that. And now that they've lifted the restrictions pretty much across the board, are you seeing any of these businesses struggling to go back, or seeing that they have to keep the restrictions, or obviously you're working with many different companies across the country or across the world, really. So are you seeing that balance just happen, or are you seeing that some businesses are more stricter than others with the restrictions and stuff like that?
We are seeing a mix, and we're seeing the business is definitely picking up. What we are seeing is that some facilities are deciding to keep their policies in place in terms of masks usage or whether or not you're going to come into the lobby. So we do have some facilities where the state might be totally open, but the facility has decided we're going to keep the protocols. And I think for a lot of facilities, they started the whole drop off outside and they found that was so effective and efficient.
Yeah.
They're like, we're just going to keep doing that. Plus a lot of the owners loved it because it's more convenient for them. So some of them have just adopted to stay with that part of their protocol just because everybody liked it better. So I think we're seeing a mix. I do think we're seeing the biggest issue we're seeing right now is staffing. Just like in so many places, we have a lot of facilities that are limiting the number of dogs they can take right now, not because of space, but because of how many staff they have to safely take care of the dogs. And so that's kind of the newest process for what we're seeing in the pet industry, which means calling in advance for those reservations is going to be more important now than ever, because we literally have people or have businesses that are turning people away because
we actually have to do it. I don't like doing it. I'll be honest. I don't like doing it. And it's irrelevant to business. It's just because I know, we at Blue Line Canine, we have established such an awesome thing for dogs to do. I believe in Dogtopia. I believe in doing all this crazy stuff with your dog and having this great day. But what happens a lot of times, in order to keep things fair to the dogs that we have to minimize, right? We only have so many clients and so many dogs that we can handle in a day-to-day ratio. And it is rough trying to get everybody to understand, like, because I think before the pandemic, it was really just one of those things, just show up. Nobody cared. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're saying. We actually went out of town this weekend and I called a hotel and it was the same thing. They were full and it was like a tiny town. I was like, what's going on in this tiny town that you're full? And they said, no, that's just how many rooms we can have because this is the staffing we have. So it's the same. I think we're seeing it in a lot of industries, but it's definitely something to consider if you want to start bringing your dog to daycare and maybe get them used to being, in another location while you're at work a couple days a week, which I think is a great opportunity for the dog to, get out and exercise his mind and body while you might be back at work. Or if you're going to go out of town, and that's the other thing, if you're going to go out of town for vacation, I would definitely be taking your dog and leaving them overnight 1 or 2 nights while you're still in town to see how they do. So again, I love that idea. I personally have never really thought that somebody should experiment with that ahead of time. We have a few of our clients, what they do is they pay for our country club to come to our country club. So when they go away, the dogs are very used to the day-to-day operations, because our boarding is also part of our country club. So they do it automatically. So any dog that boards at our facility is automatically put into our country club, which is the enrichment stuff. Right. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll drop the dog off for the country club, getting him used to what happens during the day. So which I think I like it, because it makes the dog, the way I saw it was, well, the dog doesn't really realize when mom or dad are not coming, because it's they're already there for the day. It's just mom or dad didn't pick him up, I guess, for the week. But it's, I guess, having a night, do you find it to be very beneficial, or is it more of just testing for the what if?
I think it's more testing for the what if. And to your point, if your enrichment program includes downtime, which is what we would recommend, downtime where they're in enclosures, which are usually the lodging enclosures, I don't necessarily think you need to leave them overnight unless that dog has a hard time being in the enclosure by himself, which isn't usually the case because they've been exercised. So most of the time they go in there and they're like, oh, I'm sleeping. So in that situation, I probably wouldn't say you have to do an overnight test. But if your enrichment is more of the day-long play where they're out and they don't really ever get put up separately into an enclosure, they're never really anywhere that there aren't other dogs or other people, then I would say maybe we need to test to make sure that an overnight stay where they're going to be, in a lodging enclosure for a few hours is not something that's going to completely stress the dog out. And it's really more if the dog, because I'm an advocate that, what is best for the dog may not be your business. So I'm a big advocate that if your daycare,
you're going to have to expand that one. You're going to have to expand that one right there.
Not your business specifically. I mean like you're the generic.
No, that's what I mean. I know what you meant by it. I'm just trying to say we got to clarify.
But I'm saying some dogs are better off with a dog sitter. And we shouldn't be trying to force that dog to enjoy or tolerate really an overnight stay in a lodging facility. I think a lot of senior dogs fall in that category, where if you don't have a program for senior dogs, I think really young puppies, same category. if you don't have a program specifically for that age, you should be telling them to go someplace else, refer them to somebody that you
Yeah.
trust. And then there's pet sitters who maybe have dogs that they're so high energy and they need a job and they need like a lot of interaction that maybe 2 visits a day or 3 visits a day isn't enough for that dog. And they maybe should recommend that dog go to, the canine country club where they're going to get a
Yeah.
little bit more interaction. So that, I just think that's sort of what the testing period is. It's like overnight stay. Is this dog okay and safe, feeling comfortable, whatever,
Right.
or is he flipping out so much that we can work on this? But if that owner is going to be gone for like 7 days starting tomorrow, then maybe that's not the best place for that dog. So that's kind of what I really am looking at.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and it makes a lot of sense because, again, some dogs, when they come into the facilities, it can have great experiences before, but they have anxiety, of panic attacks. They have other issues, and sometimes you have to be prepared for the what if factors, right? What if you really should never just drop your dog off and ditch them.
Right.
Obviously, you really want them to get used to the facility. Yeah, it's a little bit more money to test it out, have a day run or something like that, but in my opinion, it's way better than finding out that your dog just, licked the hot spot into his leg or something along those lines, right? Because of the stressors and stuff like that. So,
and I think too, it depends on kind of what other services that facility offers. So if you happen to have trainers on staff who can work with the dog, that's different. If you leave a dog that's got any kind where it has a behavioral issue, is there someone who's actually trained and experienced to handle that kind of thing versus somebody that maybe doesn't have a training team at all? I think some of that matters too, if you have a dog that's having any specific problem like that.
Yeah, I really like how, we talk about senior dogs, right? And, I'll be honest, I'm more of an advocate. The pet sitter is definitely a better option for your senior dogs. It's just the day-to-day operation in a boarding facility is rough, right? It's typically uncomfortable. The dogs then have to get, stressed, used to the different temperatures. They're a little bit more susceptible. I just think they're definitely one of those categories. And it doesn't matter about enrichment programs to me. I just think a senior dog, deserves home.
I agree with that. I will say though that there are now facilities that are setting up specific programs for senior dogs where it is a home environment. So it's not more sterile kennel lodging enclosure, but more couches and chairs and that kind of thing, and they have different just a totally different room and layout, and even what that dog has to be exposed to even get to that room is totally different, because I do think the senior dogs need totally different environment. So I would agree with that.
It's the same thing as puppies, right? Like you get that dog that's under 6 months. It's not, completely vaccinated, and it needs a lot of attention. It's still potty training. It's not where the other dogs are. It's creating those things. So you really have to know about the programs that are set up for it, right? So
and don't even get me started on puppy programs, because if I am a big advocate, if that you shouldn't even have a choice. If you go to a daycare and you're like, oh, my puppy's 4.5 months, here's the program we have for puppies. Like and a lot of places don't have that. So I don't think, even if it's a bigger puppy, I don't think it's appropriate to just put them with the regular daycare dogs, because they have different needs at that age. So that is where I put my trainer hat on. I go, that's just not good. So
yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, honestly, the dog has to be a certain temperament, and it has to be at a certain maturity point, because under a certain age, in particular, I really think your main impactful point is under 6 months. You put a dog under 6 months into an environment that's really rough and tough, you can break that dog's spirit.
Right.
It's such a developmental stage in that window. And one bad mishap can knock that dog into a whole new world, right? A door stands, if they close the door crate on them, or just a little bit rougher on them, just because of something else happening or an emergency occurring, can really set the tone for not such a pretty thing, right? And it's something I think that most people just don't really consider, right? They think of it's like, oh, they're going to play, they're going to this, but there's maturity points in animals, just like there's maturity points with us, right? Like, my kids love to play, right? And I always tell people, like, they can play, but grandma needs a break, right? And at the same time, the younger they are, the higher the drive. But the thing is that the older you are, the rougher you play.
Right.
So like a teenager and a toddler playing, the toddler might have the energy, but the teenager has the strength.
Right.
And one good hit from that teenager and that toddler is going to second guess 9 out of 10 of their decisions. And that's where you have to think about it. So I have to agree with you with the puppy things. Now, so that brings up a great point.
I just have to jump in because now I'm on my soapbox. But
Okay,
I will say most of the people that we see that bring their puppies to daycare, they want socialization. So I'm just going to say this is that socialization, I think, obviously is an amazing thing. And I do agree with socializing puppies. But when you bring them to daycare, the very first time, they're meeting some new handlers, they're meeting some new people, they're in a new lobby, and then they're in a new room where there might be some other dogs. And then after that, the socialization ends. Like every time they're coming and they're meeting those same people. Yeah. So to me, and really they are meeting new dogs every day. So they are getting socialized to meet new dogs. But I will say that for young puppies, dog to dog socialization is the least of my worries. Like that to me is the least important thing to socialize your dog around. I mean, there's a whole world out there, other people, other environments, bus stops, kids, bikes, car, like the whole 9 yards. So I would rather have a facility, if they're going to take puppies that young, they're doing that kind of socialization, not just putting them in a group of dogs. So, but I think for pet parents, they're trying their best to say, this is going to be a great way to socialize my dog. So he learns to play with dogs. And I don't necessarily think that's the most important thing for a young puppy. When it comes to
like what'd you say earlier? 40% of dogs want to play with other dogs, 60% of them want to be left alone, right? And I mean, obviously we don't know those numbers to be accurate, but I would definitely tell you from experience of it, I would say it's pretty accurate, right? Like you can take a lot of dogs into a room and for the most part they'll play with each other, but a lot of times people tend to forget that the dog's nickname is man's best friend, meaning human's best friend, not dog's best friend, right? A lot of times we tend to forget that they really want us more than they want their own, right? Like
and that's the thing. I really want them to learn to interact with me or humans more because they already know how to interact with dogs. And I will say that my rule for a pet parent would be, I do want a dog that can walk down the street and not lose its mind when it sees another dog. And there's a lot of training, obviously, that you and I both know that can help with that. So attention on you when they're walking by another dog, whatever, or they notice it, but they don't care. They keep on walking with you. That's my goal. My goal is never to have the dog that will absolutely play with every other dog he meets, because I don't think that's critical for a dog to love life. And I think that I can tell you 30 years ago when I started my daycare, nobody knew what daycare was. Dog parks did not exist. I spent all of my time talking to pet parents about why they should bring their dog to my daycare. And they would be like, what are they going to do? Well, he's going to play with other dogs. Why should they do that? And I don't know, like 30 years later, I feel like we've gotten that message totally on the other end of the spectrum where people actually think something's wrong with their dog if their dog doesn't want to play. And that's just not true. And, let's just give your dogs a break and decide like, hey, if your dog doesn't want to play with other dogs, then figure out what it does like to do. And probably that's something to do with you playing fetch or going for a walk or whatever it is.
It's funny how when we get a message out and it catches momentum, right? And that's what it sounds like you just said. Like you had a message like, come bring your dog to doggy daycare. Well, it caught momentum. Now you're like, okay, keep your dog at home.
That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. That's exactly how I feel.
But it's a twofold. I mean, I definitely think there's a balance, right?
Right.
I know for us, my thing is we push the dogs during our enrichment. There's a ton of enrichment. So we're real big advocates that we have to monitor the dogs. You want to make sure you have the good staff, and you probably agree with that, is that the facilities that you're going to, you want to make sure the staff knows the dogs, they know what they're doing, because they don't want them pushed every day. So you want to make sure the dog gets rest, the dog is rejuvenating, because just like us, their muscles need to re-go into it. So Robin, it was fantastic having you on. It was really an honor to have you on here, and Semper Fi. So it's a cool thing to have you on here. I do want to bring you back, and I also want to invite you on my other show called Stuck in the Truck, which we will do.
I was just watching some of that the other day, actually.
Were you? Awesome. Did you like that? A little my motivational stuff, right?
It was
I would
fun.
love to have you actually on that show with me one day, but we'll set it up on a different day or evening so it works good with you, because that show's typically recorded way in the morning. And I believe you're in the I think we're in a different time zone. Is that right? I
Yeah, I'm
think
in
we're
Colorado, so
yeah. So yeah, you're in a way different time zone than me. So we'll definitely have to set up an evening time to do a pre-recorded show, because it's all about business and building. And since the Dog Gurus is a business consulting company, I would love to have you on that show to talk about that and teach people there about consulting and growing companies, not just the pet industry as well. So thank you so much for coming on, being with us, giving all this information. It's been fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, I forgot to do this in the beginning of the episode, and I can't believe I did that, because I always like to say thank you for liking, loving, and subscribing. It means the world, because that's the only reason why these shows keep going. It's because you guys keep watching and sharing the love. So thank you guys so much. Robin, thank you. And just hang tight while we sign off. All right, guys. See you guys all next week, or you can also find me tomorrow at BLK9 TV for an episode of Stuck in the Truck. Bye, everybody.